Montana Territory. Summer of 1883. The wind howled through the Judith Basin like it had somewhere to be, kicking dust along the porch of the weather-worn homestead where Rowan Larkspur stood with a shotgun resting against her hip. She had not fired it. Not yet. But the man riding up the hill on horseback had not slowed, either. Rowan squinted into the sun, her jaw tight, her chest stiff with the kind of ache that came from too many years alone. The man was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a hat tugged low and a rifle slung across his back. He stopped a few yards away, dismounted in one smooth motion, and tipped his hat. "Afternoon, madam," he said. His voice was calm, deep. "I'm not looking for trouble. Just water for my horse. And maybe a word." Rowan's grip on the shotgun stayed firm. "Depends what the word is." He nodded once like that was fair. "Name's Rhett Garner. I bought the old Galloway place 3 miles west. Been fixing it up. My fence line runs close to yours." Rowan lowered the barrel a few inches. "The fence is yours, so fix it. You do not need to ask permission." He smiled just a little. "I figured as much. Truth is, I came to say that I'll be running cattle through soon. Did not want to startle anyone." Rowan glanced behind her. The house was quiet. It always was. No one here to startle but me. Rhett looked past her shoulder, his eyes scanning the empty porch. "You live out here alone?" Rowan didn't answer. She stepped back, pushed open the screen door, and nodded toward the pump. "Water's there. Do what you came for." Rhett led his horse to the trough, filled it, and let the animal drink. He moved with ease, like someone who had lived more in the saddle than under a roof. Rowan watched from the doorway, her fingers still curled around the shotgun. He did not try to talk again until his horse was watered and his canteen refilled. "I knew this land when I was a boy," he said, tying off the canteen. "Used to ride out here with my father. Your place always looked the same. Still does." Rowan's voice was flat. "Because nothing ever changes out here." Rhett looked at her then, really looked. "Some things change," he said. "Some things are waiting to." She did not reply. He mounted back up and tipped his hat again. "Thank you for the water, Mississippi." "Larkspur," she said. "Rowan Larkspur." His mouth twitched. "Pretty name." She closed the door without a word. Rowan had not expected to see him again. But 2 weeks later, she heard the sound of a hammer striking wood near her fence line. She found Rhett there in the heat, sleeves rolled up, building a proper gate where the old one had fallen years ago. "I didn't ask for this," she said, arms crossed. He looked up from the post he was setting. "I know, but I figured you might want one that swings." She watched him work. His motions were steady, sure. "You always fix things that do not belong to you?" "No," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just the ones that need fixing." Rowan said nothing. She turned and walked back to the house, but when she looked out the window an hour later, the gate was done and Rhett was gone. That night, Rowan sat alone on the porch, her knitting in her lap, though she had not touched it in weeks. The wind was softer now. The prairie stretched out wide before her, golden and quiet. She had lived here for 12 years. 12 hard years since the fever took her husband, and her little boy Nathan 2 winters later. There had been no one after. No family, no neighbors, not even a drifter with a kind smile. Just her grief and the land. So, she never expected the knock on her door the following week. Rhett stood there, holding a small wooden crate. "Chickens," he said. "For hens, 1 rooster. Figured you might like the eggs." Rowan stared at the squawking box. "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "You look like someone who has done more giving in her life than getting." She opened the door wider, just enough. "Set them by the coop." He did, then stood with his hands on his hips, looking around. "You never think about leaving?" "No, why not?" Rowan met his gaze. Because this land remembers my boy. Rhett nodded slowly. Then it's good land. The next time he came over, it was with a saddlebag full of seed packets. The time after that, a jar of wild plum preserves. Then a plank of fresh pine. For what? Rowan asked, eyeing it. He glanced at the porch. Thought maybe you could use a new chair. One that does not creak like it is crying. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. I do not need help. I know. But you keep coming back. He stepped closer. I do. She looked away, heart thudding. She had grown used to silence, to hard nights and harder days. But Rhett's voice had started to fill the quiet, and she was not sure how to feel about that. By the start of fall, Rhett had built her a rocking chair beside his own. He brought it over one morning, set it down beside hers like it had always belonged there. She came out with 2 mugs of coffee, looked at it, then at him. You built that. For you, he said, so you do not have to sit alone. Rowan stared at the chair, her throat tight. I thought I would grow old alone. His eyes softened. You do not have to. She sat down. He sat beside her. They said nothing for a long time, just rocked. The wind moved through the tall grass like a whisper, the sun warming the porch. And for the first time in 12 years, Rowan Larkspur felt something shift in her chest, something slow and deep and startlingly alive. He reached over just once and set his hand over hers. She did not pull away. The first frost came early, dusting the edges of the prairie in silver and making the boards of the porch pop in the cold. Rowan stepped out with a quilt draped over her shoulders and found Rhett already there, brushing the seat of his chair with a gloved hand. You beat me to it, she said, settling beside him. Couldn't sleep, he said. The wind had a voice last night. She pulled the quilt tighter. Sounded like it was looking for someone. He glanced at her, then back toward the horizon. Maybe it found what it was looking for. The chickens clucked somewhere near the shed, their rustling low and contented. Rhett had installed a latch on the coop door without asking. Rowan hadn't said anything when she noticed it, but she'd started keeping back extra cornbread for him after supper, just in case he happened by before sundown. Do you ever miss Texas? She asked. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That obvious? Not the state, she said, but the way you talk. He smiled with only half his mouth. Left when I was 19. Drove cattle north with my brother and never rode back. Thought I'd get the dust off my boots by now, but it's still there. Rowan looked out over the land. I reckon it never leaves you, the places that shaped you. He nodded. You ever think about what you'd be doing if life had gone different? No, she said quietly. I think about the work in front of me. That's enough. Rhett leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking low beneath him. I've been meaning to ask you something. She glanced at him, wary. What now? He turned to face her fully. There's a harvest dance next weekend, over near Utica. I was thinking you might like to go. Rowan blinked. Why? I'd like your company, he said, plain and steady. I wouldn't ask if I didn't mean it. She looked down at her lap. Her hands were still, the quilt pooled around them. I haven't danced since before the war ended. Well, he said, I haven't since I got this scar. He pointed to a pale line that ran just beneath his chin. Took a boot heel to the jaw after I stepped on a girl's hem. Rowan raised an eyebrow. And you want to repeat the experience? I want to see what it's like to dance with someone who'd let me try again. She looked at him then, long enough for the silence to settle between them with weight. He didn't press, just waited, the way he always did with patience that didn't demand anything from her. I don't have anything fit to wear, she said finally. I have a wagon, he said. We could take it into town this week. There's a dry goods store that still sells calico bolts. Her mouth twitched. You're determined. He nodded. I am. Rowan stood slowly, the quilt slipping from her shoulders. Then I suppose I'd best look through the coin jar. That night, she lit a second lamp in the sitting room for the first time in years. It cast a soft glow over the cracked floorboards and the worn settee. She pulled her sewing tin from the cabinet and opened the lid. Inside, neatly folded, was a piece of blue gingham she'd saved and forgotten. She ran her hand over it, thumb brushing the threads. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt hollow. The silence had changed shape. It held breath now and waiting. 2 days later, Rhett waited outside the store in Utica while Rowan stood at the counter inside, examining ribbons. She chose a dusky green one, soft against her fingers, and didn't flinch when the shopkeeper called her by name. When she stepped outside, Rhett took the parcel without a word and helped her into the wagon. You didn't have to come all this way, she said. I wanted to, he replied, flicking the reins. They drove back through the basin as the sun dipped low. He didn't speak, and neither did she. But as the prairie opened out before them, she let the ribbon rest across her lap and reached over, letting her hand brush his. He didn't look at her. He just turned his palm up and laced their fingers together. The barn lantern swung slightly on its hook, casting long golden shadows across the packed earth floor. Rowan tightened the strap across the mule's withers, her breath rising in faint clouds. The night had cooled fast, and the warmth of the day felt like it belonged to another season. Rhett crouched nearby, checking the wheels on the wagon one last time. You always this thorough? She asked, brushing hay from her skirt. He stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. Only when I care how the night ends. She glanced at him, then away. It's just a dance. That's not how I see it. They rode in silence for a while, the lantern flickering between them. The road into town was rutted and winding, the sky above them scattered with stars. Rowan watched the horizon, arms folded, the ribbon from the store tied neatly at her collar. You ever learn to waltz? Rhett asked, keeping his eyes on the road. My mother tried to teach me once. Said it would help me marry well. She gave a short sound, not quite a laugh. Didn't take. I could show you, he said. Not the marrying part. The waltz. She didn't answer at first. Then, all right. They arrived just after the fiddles started. The Grange hall was lit with oil lamps strung high between the beams, and the plank floor carried the rhythm of boots and skirts moving in time. Rowan hesitated at the entrance, her hands stiff at her sides. Rhett offered his arm. No one's watching, he said. They always watch. Let them. She took his arm and they stepped inside. Rhett didn't rush her. They stood off to one side while he pointed out the rhythm with a tap of his boot. Rowan followed his lead, her movements careful, her brow furrowed in thought. He didn't laugh when she missed a step. He adjusted, matched her pace, and waited for her to find her balance. After the second song, she looked up. I never knew it could be easy. It's not, he said, but it feels that way when it's right. They danced 3 more times before stepping outside to cool off. The air had turned crisp, the scent of wood smoke drifting from nearby farms. Rowan leaned against the railing, her cheeks flushed, her pulse steady now. You were married before, Rhett said, not as a question. Yes. You don't speak of him. There's nothing to say that hasn't already been said to the Lord. He nodded. I lost someone too. She wasn't mine long. Wasn't mine at all, really. Just a girl I met in Kansas. Her father didn't think much of cowhands. Rowan looked over at him. Did you love her? I thought I did, he said. But if I'm honest, I think I loved the idea of being loved back. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's not the same thing. No, he said. It isn't. The music picked up again inside. Faster now, a reel with clapping and stomping. Rowan didn't move to return. Neither did he. "I don't want someone to fix me," she said. "I've made a life out of what's left." "I don't mean to fix anything," Rhett said. "Just to stand beside it." She looked at him, long and searching. "I don't know how to begin again." "You already did," he said. "The day you let me build that chair." She didn't smile, but she nodded once. They didn't go back inside. They rode home under the stars, the mule's hooves steady against the road. Rhett didn't speak again, and Rowan didn't need him to. When they reached her porch, he helped her down, hands steady at her waist. She turned before opening the door. "Will you come back tomorrow?" He held her gaze. "I'll come back as long as you let me." She opened the door and stepped inside. But before she closed it, she looked back. "You'll need to bring another board," she said. "That old stoop's starting to sag." His eyes warmed. "I'll bring two." And she closed the door not against him, but with him still on the other side. By the time the cottonwoods along the creek had gone bare, Rhett's wagon was a familiar sound on the trail east of the Galloway claim. Rowan didn't wait by the door anymore. She kept to her mending or her grinding or the sorting of dry beans, and when his boots hit the porch, she simply opened the door and handed him a cup of coffee without ceremony. On a gray morning thick with low cloud, he arrived with a sack of flour over one shoulder and a weather-stained map folded under his arm. "I found something," he said, setting the flour near the stove. "Thought you'd want to see." Rowan wiped her hands on her apron and took the map. She spread it across the table, eyes narrowing. "There's an old trail here," he said, tapping the faded ink near the Judith River. "Leads to a cluster of springs. My brother and I passed through once, but I never knew it was marked. Could make a good winter ride. Not far." She studied the lines, then looked up. "Why show me? You spend enough time on your land. Thought you might want to see something different. Just for a day. I don't know if I remember how to ride for pleasure." "You don't need to. You just need to sit the saddle." They left before dawn 2 days later. Rowan wore her husband's old coat, the sleeves rolled, the buttons mismatched. Rhett guided her to a bay mare he'd gentled himself, a calm animal with soft eyes. "She's steady," he said. "Won't pull or spook." Rowan mounted without help. "I don't want her steady. I want her honest." "You'll get both," he said, swinging astride his gelding. They rode through the basin in silence, hooves muffled by frost-hardened earth. The sun broke through just as they reached the edge of a ravine where the land split open, revealing a shallow basin below. Steam lifted in thin threads from the springs nestled between stone and brush. Rowan dismounted and stood at the edge, her breath visible in the air. "I haven't been anywhere off my land in years," she said. "Not really. Not like this." Rhett tied the horses and joined her. "What do you see?" She didn't answer right away. "It's quiet, but not empty, like it's been waiting a long time to be found again." He nodded. "You remind me of that." Rowan turned to him, not startled, just steady. "Meaning, some places don't call out. They just stand quiet until the right person steps near." They sat on a sun-warmed rock, passing a canteen between them. Rowan took off her gloves and let her hands rest bare in her lap. "I used to think grief was a thing that would pass," she said. "Like a fever, something to endure. But it just settled in. Became part of the shape of me." Rhett didn't reach for her. He didn't speak. He waited. "I don't feel guilty now," she said, eyes still on the water. "Not sitting here with you. You don't owe anyone an apology for healing." She looked at him fully then. "And what about you? Have you healed?" "I don't know," he said, "but I don't wake up angry anymore. That's something." She nodded, thoughtful. "It is." They stayed until the sun dipped west, casting golden light across the wide, open land. Rowan mounted without hesitation this time, her coat flaring behind her like a banner. Rhett rode close, not crowding, just near enough for the rhythm of hoofbeats to align. When they reached the porch, she handed him her reins and stepped down on her own. "I'll make stew," she said, brushing hay from her skirt. "You'll stay?" He nodded once. "If you'll have me." Inside, the fire was already lit, and the lamp on the table burned steady. Rowan moved with quiet purpose, pulling dry herbs from the wall and dropping them into the pot with a practiced hand. When she passed Rhett the bowl, their fingers touched. She didn't draw back. After they ate, they sat in their chairs, the wind outside low and steady, the night clear. Rowan didn't knit. Rhett didn't speak. They rocked, side by side, the rhythm slow and even. And when she reached across the space between them and laid her hand on his knee, he covered it with his own and held it there, not to ask anything more, but simply to answer what had already been offered. The first snow held off longer than expected, but when it came, it blanketed the basin in a hush so deep Rowan paused mid-step outside the barn, just to listen. The air had the sharp, metallic taste of true winter, and the sky hung low like a held breath. She pulled her shawl tighter and stepped inside, where Rhett was repairing a harness strap with a bodkin and a length of waxed thread. He looked up when she entered. "Ground's frozen through. We'll need to move the water trough closer." "I already dragged it near the chicken shed," she said, brushing snow from her skirt. "Didn't want the hens pecking ice." He set the strap down. "You always think 3 steps ahead." "I had to," she said, then softened. "But I don't mind sharing the steps now." He stood, his hands rough from the leather. "I've been thinking about spring." Rowan's gaze fixed on the wall behind him. "It's a long way off." "Not so long," he said. "I was thinking I'd plant something more than oats this time. Maybe corn, beans. Something that takes tending." She walked to the edge of the stall, ran her hand along the mule's flank. "That land's rocky near the west fence." "I'll clear it," he said, "if you'd help me mark the rows." She turned her head slowly. "You're not asking just about crops." "No," he said, "I'm not." She waited. The mule shifted beside her but said nothing, and neither did she. "I want to build on this," Rhett said, quiet but steady. "Not just the land. A home that belongs to both of us." Rowan crossed to the workbench, where a tin of salve sat open. She pressed the lid down firmly before speaking. "I've lived a long time without expectation. I know, and I've come to trust the shape of silence. It's kept me safe." He stepped forward, not touching her but near enough she could feel the heat of him. "I won't take the quiet from you, just give you a voice in it." She met his eyes. There was no doubt in them, only a calm certainty that steadied her in a way nothing else had. "I don't need a wedding dress," she said. "You don't need anything but what you already are." They married in February, under a sky thick with snow clouds. The Reverend from Utica came out in his sleigh, his wife clutching a Bible in one hand and a tin of wintergreen candies in the other. Rowan wore her mother's brooch at her collar and tied her hair back with the same ribbon she'd worn to the dance. Rhett stood tall in a coat brushed clean and a collar white as bleached linen. They spoke their vows on the porch, the same spot where he'd once placed a rocking chair beside hers. The ground beneath them was hard and frozen, but nothing about the moment felt cold. Afterward, Rhett took her hand and didn't let it go, even when the Reverend bid them good fortune and turned his sleigh back toward town. Inside, supper was already simmering. The fire cracked and popped, and the small table had been set with care. Rowan poured cider into 2 tin cups and set them down with a nod. "This house has always been mine," she said, settling into her chair. "But now it feels like something more." Rhett reached across the table, took her hand slow. "It's ours now. Everything from the door latch to the far fence." She smiled, not the tight, careful kind she'd worn for years, but one that reached every part of her. "Then I suppose we ought to start living like it." They did. That spring, Rhett cleared the rocky patch beyond the chicken shed. They planted row after row of corn and beans and later squash. Rowan added calendula and feverfew near the porch, herbs she hadn't bothered with in years. Rhett built a new coop with a slanted roof, and Rowan stitched muslin curtains for the sitting room window. They never argued about who did what. They rose early, worked side by side, and spoke when there was something to say. At night, they sat close, her hand resting on his knee, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. He carved her a cabinet for her sewing things. She mended the hem of his coat without being asked. In late summer, when the beans came in heavy and the hens laid more than they could eat, Rowan packed jars with vinegar and dill and lined the cellar shelves. Rhett stacked firewood high against the wall, enough to last 2 winters. They never spoke of the pain that had come before. But in the quiet moments, when the wind curled around the corners of the house or the mule brayed softly in its stall, they understood it had shaped them, not broken them, not ended them. One night, as the sky turned the color of ash and the air grew still, Rowan stepped onto the porch and looked out over the land. Rhett stood behind her, arms folded, eyes on the same horizon. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "I think about waking up beside you," he said, "and the rest follows." She reached back, took his hand, and placed it against her waist. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said. "You are," he replied. "With me you'll always be." The sun dipped low, casting the basin in burnt gold, and the wind, for once, kept quiet.